You know, the kind of places that don't exist on maps? Those old roadside motels you speed past without a second thought, their neon lights flickering with the last gasp of electricity like they're barely alive. That's the Blue Swallow Motel for you. Right off Route 66 in Tucumcari, New Mexico. An old icon of the glory days long gone. I found myself there in September. Life has a funny way of pulling you to places you never planned to be. I had nothing left. Lost my apartment. My boyfriend walked out. I needed money. And when you're desperate enough, you'll take any job, even if it's working the night shift at a roadside diner that smells like stale cigarettes and grease. Just pour coffee and keep the counter clean, Earl, the manager, had said. Earl was a sunken man with an expression like cracked leather. He handed me a key, led me inside the diner attached to the motel, and disappeared as quickly as he'd come. It was late when I found the coffee pot. The metal was scorched, burnt in odd patterns that looked almost intentional. I didn't pay it much mind until I poured my first cup of coffee. That's when I saw it. The steam rising, like it can think, and written there, just for a moment, as if the air itself whispered them into being, were the rules. Rule 1. Do not pour coffee for anyone after 3:15 a.m., under any circumstances. Rule 2. If a customer asks for a special brew, serve black coffee only. Do not look at them directly. Rule 3. If you hear knocking from the motel office, do not answer the door. Rule 4. Always clean the coffee pot before the end of your shift. Never leave it dirty. Rule 5. The faces in the steam are not real. Do not acknowledge them. Rule 6. If you spill the coffee, wipe it up immediately. The stains are not stains. I should have walked out that very night, but I don't know why. I stayed. I showed up at midnight, as instructed. Earl left me alone in the diner with little more than a grunt and the faint smell of bourbon trailing after him. The diner was straight out of the 1950s. Checkered floors, cracked leather booths, and a jukebox that didn't play music anymore. The coffee pot sat on the burner, still warm. It hummed softly, as though alive. I ignored it at first, busying myself wiping down the counter and sweeping up the dirt tracked in by passing truckers. It was around 1 a.m. when the first customer walked in. He looked normal enough. Dusty jeans, a flannel shirt, boots worn from walking miles of nowhere. He didn't say much, just took a seat at the counter and muttered, "Coffee, please." I grabbed the pot without thinking. As the coffee poured, the steam curled upward. I stopped mid-pour, my breath catching in my throat. There was a face. It flickered just for a moment, eyes sunken deep into sockets, a mouth frozen in a silent scream. I blinked hard, my hands trembling. The face vanished as quickly as it appeared. The customer didn't seem to notice, so I set the cup in front of him and hurried back behind the counter. "Rough night?" the man asked, his voice gravelly. I nodded, forcing a weak smile. My eyes darted back to the coffee pot, watching the steam rising again. This time, faint words materialized in the mist. "Follow the rules, Lily." My heart dropped into my stomach. How does it know my name? The man finished his coffee, tossed a few crumpled bills onto the counter, and left without another word. I grabbed the rag to clean the cup, and that's when I noticed the ring of black residue left in the bottom of the mug. It wasn't coffee. It smelled like rot. The next customer walked in at 2:45 a.m. He was different, too still, too clean, wearing a crisp black suit. The bell above the door jingled faintly, though I swear it didn't make a sound when he entered. He sat at the counter, hands folded neatly in front of him. "Special brew," he said softly. The air felt wrong, heavy like the diner had been filled with invisible smoke. I remembered the second rule. Special brew. Serve black coffee only. Do not look at them directly. Sure thing, I muttered, forcing my eyes to stay on the coffee pot. My hands shook as I poured black coffee into the cup. I slid it across the counter, careful not to look up. I could feel him watching me, though, could feel the weight of his stare like cold hands on my neck. You're new, he said. Lily, right? The sound of my name on his tongue sent a chill down my spine. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed glued to the counter, my breath shallow. The man took a slow sip of his coffee. The cup clinked against the saucer as he set it down. You'll learn soon enough, he whispered. When I glanced up, he was gone. The door never opened. I looked at the counter where his cup sat. The coffee had turned blacker than ink, and a faint, foul smell rose from the liquid. Written in the ring left behind was a single word: run. The diner had emptied out, leaving me alone with the low hum of the coffee machine and the occasional creak of the old building settling. I sat at the counter, staring at the coffee pot like it was a ticking time bomb. My hands still shook from the last encounter. The man in the suit and the word run etched into the saucer stain like a warning. I checked the time on the ancient clock nailed to the wall. 3:12 a.m. 3 minutes to the dreaded 3:15. Rule 1. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a growing unease in my stomach, like something terrible was inching closer with every tick of the second hand. Don't pour coffee for anyone after 3:15 a.m. Simple enough, I thought. But nothing about this place had been simple since I walked through the door. Outside, the wind howled through the empty highway, rattling the windows and carrying faint whispers of something I couldn't quite catch. I scrubbed at a coffee stain on the counter, though my eyes kept flicking back to the door that led to the motel office. It had been locked tight when I arrived, and I hadn't dared go near it. And then I heard it. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot, sharp and deliberate. I froze mid-swipe, my heartbeat spiking. My first instinct was to ignore it. Rule 3 had been clear. If you hear knocking from the motel office, do not answer the door. It came again, louder this time, more impatient. My eyes darted to the office door, its frosted glass window glowing faintly in the dim light. There was a shadow there, a figure obscured behind the glass. I couldn't see details, but it was tall and unmoving. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to breathe. But my curiosity gnawed at me, tempting me to disobey the rule just to look. Don't, I whispered to myself. Just don't. The knocking stopped abruptly. Silence swallowed the diner whole, stretching on for what felt like hours. My shoulders sagged with relief, and I dared to exhale. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had knocked had gone away. Then, from behind me, I heard a soft scraping sound. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, my body moving against every instinct that screamed for me to stay still. The coffee pot sat on the burner, steam curling lazily into the air. But something was different. The steam wasn't rising naturally anymore. It twisted and writhed, forming shapes. Letters. I stood and moved closer, squinting at the words that appeared in the mist. Answer the door. My breath caught in my throat. I shook my head, stumbling back. No, 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 no. The scraping sound continued. It wasn't coming from the office door anymore. It was coming from the counter. I turned back and froze. The coffee cup I had cleaned earlier was sitting there again, pristine and empty. Beside it, a message had been scratched into the wood of the counter, the letters jagged and uneven as if carved by invisible nails. 3:15. It's time. The clock ticked. 3:14 a.m. I backed away, bumping into a chair and nearly tripping over it. My gaze flickered between the counter, the office door, and the clock. My skin tingled with a sense of dread so intense it almost choked me. The knocking returned, harder now, more insistent. My knees buckled. Whoever or whatever was behind that door wanted in, and it wasn't going to stop until I answered. The rules circled in my head like a broken record. Do not answer the door. The clock struck 3:15 a.m. The knocking stopped. Everything went still, like the world itself had taken a breath. I stood there in silence, waiting, shaking. Maybe it's over, I thought. Maybe... Then the door began to creak. It didn't burst open, nor did it slam. It simply swung inward, the hinges groaning as it revealed the motel office beyond. I couldn't see anything except darkness. My flashlight lay on the counter, and before I could stop myself, I grabbed it and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the edge of the office. Papers fluttered on the desk as though disturbed by an invisible breeze. A half-empty coffee cup sat there, its surface rippling. And then I saw him. A figure stood in the corner of the room, half hidden in shadow. I couldn't see his face, only the vague outline of someone impossibly still. The flashlight flickered. My heart slammed against my ribs. The figure moved. One step closer. I bolted, stumbling over my feet as I fled back to the counter. The office door slammed shut behind me with enough force to rattle the walls. The coffee pot hissed as steam rose into the air again, forming two words that burned themselves into my vision. Run now! I didn't need to be told twice. I didn't stop to think. My legs moved on instinct, and I bolted toward the diner's main door. My shoes slapped against the checkered tiles, echoing too loudly in the silence. My hands fumbled against the handle as I yanked it hard. It didn't budge. I pulled again, this time with everything I had, but the door wouldn't move an inch. It felt like it was cemented to the frame. My breathing turned ragged, and I slapped my palms against the glass, staring out at the empty lot beyond. The parking lot was just as I'd seen it earlier, still, lifeless, covered in a thin sheet of dust. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting a pale glow over the cracked asphalt. I pounded on the glass, the sound hollow and thin. "Come on, let me out!" No one was there. The wind outside didn't howl. The stars didn't twinkle. Everything was still, as if the world beyond the diner had frozen in time. The sound of movement behind me made me whip around. The diner looked the same. Old booths, worn counters, the silent jukebox, but the atmosphere had changed. The air felt thicker, like I was wading through invisible water. The humming sound from earlier returned, vibrating low and deep through the floors. I turned to the coffee pot, still on the burner, glowing faintly with its cursed steam. The rules. The rules had to mean something. I glanced up at the clock again. 3:18 a.m. My gaze snapped to the counter where the rules had first appeared. The steam curled upward again, languid and deliberate, as if it was writing just for me. This time the message was chillingly clear. The door is not your escape. A tremor ran through me, my skin cold and clammy. I grabbed the flashlight again and backed away from the counter, my eyes darting between the front door and the shadowy hall that led to the restrooms and storage room. Think, Lily, think. I remembered Rule 4. Always clean the coffee pot before the end of your shift. Never leave it dirty. Maybe the rules weren't just warnings. They were instructions. I had broken nothing yet, but I felt the edge of something approaching, something that would punish me if I strayed. My heart pounding, I turned toward the hallway. If I couldn't leave, I had to find another way to make this stop. I needed to reset whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. The storage hallway was darker than I remembered. My flashlight flickered as I shone it down the narrow corridor, revealing the battered walls and doors with chipped paint. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead sounded louder now, like a hive of bees vibrating against my eardrums. I moved quickly, not daring to look at the black windows on either side. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw shapes moving in the glass, shapes that looked too human. Shadows, but not mine. I forced myself not to stop. The storage door was at the end of the hallway, a battered sign hanging crookedly above it. I grabbed the handle and pushed it open, the old hinges screeching in protest. The smell hit me first. Stale air, damp with a faint undertone of rotting coffee grounds. The storage room was small, cluttered with ancient boxes, dusty shelves, and broken equipment. The flashlight skimmed over an old coffee machine shoved into the corner, surrounded by stacks of unused cups and cracked saucers. And then I saw it. The coffee pot. It sat on the ground, identical to the one on the diner counter, but this one looked worse. Its glass was scorched all the way through, covered in black stains that looked burned into the surface. A dark residue pooled at the bottom like oil, but it pulsed faintly, as though alive. The moment the flashlight touched it, a sound filled the air. A soft, steady tapping. It was coming from the shelves, from the walls. I turned slowly, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The tapping grew louder, like dozens of invisible fingers drumming against the wood. My chest tightened, and I stumbled back toward the pot. I heard voices then, muffled whispers, too quiet to understand, swirling around me like a swarm of bees. My name was among them. Lily? Lily? My hands shook as I reached for the pot, something in me screaming to destroy it, to stop this nightmare before it got worse. But as my fingers grazed the glass, the whispers stopped. Silence. I froze, feeling the cold press of the pot against my fingertips. Then the flashlight flickered, the beam dimming. I looked up, and in the reflection of the pot's scorched surface, I saw myself standing there. But it wasn't me. The reflection was smiling. The beam of the flashlight cut out entirely, plunging me into pitch black. The flashlight sputtered back to life just long enough for me to see it, my reflection smiling at me through the scorched glass. The grin was unnatural, stretched too wide, too hollow, as if something was trying to wear my face like a mask. I stumbled back, crashing into a stack of crates. The noise echoed sharply, but I didn't care. I scrambled to my feet, breathing like I'd run a marathon, and aimed the light back at the coffee pot. The smile was gone. Had I imagined it? The whispers had stopped. The tapping was gone. But the silence that filled the room felt worse, like something was holding its breath, waiting for me to move. My hand hovered near the pot, my fingers trembling as I forced myself to grab it. I didn't know what I was doing anymore, whether I was fixing a problem or making it worse, but something told me I couldn't leave the pot there. Clutching it tightly, I turned back toward the hallway. The door swung shut behind me with a creak that seemed far too deliberate. The flashlight's beam lit the path ahead, casting long, claw-like shadows across the walls. My heart was hammering so loudly, I barely noticed the faint knocking that followed me, slow, rhythmic taps that seemed to trail me from room to room. By the time I emerged into the diner again, my legs were shaking. I set the pot back on the burner with a shaky exhale, staring at the clock. 3:27 a.m. The diner looked exactly as I'd left it. Empty booths, the silent jukebox, the faint hum of fluorescent lights. But something was off. The air felt denser, as though the walls had closed in slightly. And then I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A man sat in one of the corner booths, his back to me. His shoulders were hunched, and his head tilted just slightly to the side, as though he were listening. He hadn't been there when I'd gone into the hallway. I knew that for a fact. "Sir?" I called, my voice breaking. No answer. The air grew colder with every step I took toward him, my shoes squeaking against the checkered tiles. I stopped a few feet away, close enough to see that his clothes were wrong. His suit was threadbare, tattered at the edges, as though it had been buried for years. The man didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, perfectly still. I swallowed hard. "Sir, the diner's closed." Still nothing. I reached out hesitantly, fingers trembling as I touched his shoulder. The moment I did, the man's head snapped upright with a sickening crack. My heart jumped into my throat as he turned to face me. His eyes were hollow, empty, and in his coffee cup, the one sitting in front of him, there was a face. A woman's face. My face. It floated there in the liquid, rippling slightly, the mouth open in a silent scream. I stumbled back, knocking into a table, and the man began to laugh. It wasn't human. The sound scraped against my ears, dry and brittle, like bones rattling together. He raised the cup to his lips and took a slow, deliberate sip, the liquid turning blacker than ink as it slid down. The lights flickered violently, plunging the diner into bursts of darkness. In the flashes, I saw them. Other customers. They sat in booths, in chairs, at the counter. They hadn't been there before, and they weren't moving. Their faces were twisted, grotesque, as if caught mid-scream, and in front of every single one of them sat a steaming cup of coffee. The faces were in the coffee, all of them. The man in the suit was back, sitting at the counter this time, his black eyes watching me with something that looked like amusement. "You didn't clean the pot," he whispered. The coffee pot hissed behind me, steam curling into the air like fingers reaching for me. I spun to face it, heart hammering. In the rising steam, a new message appeared. "You're next." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The room seemed to tilt, and the humming sound returned, vibrating so hard it rattled my teeth. My feet moved before I could stop them, carrying me out from behind the counter. I didn't care where I was going anymore, I just needed to get away. But as I turned toward the diner door, I stopped dead in my tracks. The glass had fogged over, and in the center, scrawled with invisible fingers, was one final warning. "Don't leave! They're waiting outside!" I froze in place, staring at the fogged glass door. My breath came out in shallow gasps, my pulse thudding like a hammer in my ears. The message, "Don't leave, they're waiting outside," was written so plainly as though it had been there for hours, waiting for me to notice it. I didn't want to turn around. Something deep and primal in me screamed that I shouldn't look, but I did. The diners, if you could call them that, were still there, silent, unmoving, their grotesque faces contorted in quiet agony. They occupied every booth and chair, and though none of them moved, I could feel their attention turning toward me. I stepped back, my heel knocking into the counter behind me. The coffee pot hissed again, and I spun toward it instinctively. "They're closer!" The words etched themselves into the rising steam, the letters warping as though alive. I whipped my head back to the fogged glass door. The figures outside had appeared. They were pressed against the glass, their hands smearing pale streaks across the fogged surface. Their silhouettes were dark and gaunt, too thin to be human, their fingers long and bony as they pawed at the door. They weren't knocking. They didn't need to. They just waited. Their faces weren't visible, and I was grateful for that. I knew, somehow, that if I saw their faces, I'd never come back from it. My gut told me these were the ones who hadn't followed the rules, the ones who didn't get away. I need to stop this. I need to fix this. I stumbled back, my eyes darting frantically between the ghosts outside and the patrons sitting silently inside. My mind screamed for a solution, for some kind of plan. I'd been following the rules, hadn't I? What had I missed? The steam rose from the coffee pot again, curling higher and faster now. It filled the diner like smoke, carrying with it the smell of something burnt. Flesh. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. And then I remembered Rule 6. If the faces appear in the coffee, pour it out immediately. Do not let the pot stay on the burner. I spun back toward the coffee pot. The black liquid inside bubbled furiously now, as though it had a mind of its own. I snatched the handle with trembling hands, ignoring the heat that seared my palm. My mind screamed that this was a terrible idea, that I was breaking something worse than the rules. But I couldn't stop. I stumbled toward the sink behind the counter, sweat dripping down my forehead. The coffee pot shook in my hand, the liquid sloshing over the sides. "Pour it out," I whispered to myself. "Just pour it out." Behind me I heard it, a chorus of whispers. It wasn't one voice this time. It was dozens, hundreds. The sound surrounded me like a swarm, murmuring just under the threshold of comprehension. My name surfaced every now and then, soft, pleading, desperate. "Lily, please." I slammed the pot into the sink and tipped it over. The black liquid spilled out like tar, sizzling violently as it met the cold metal. The moment the last drop hit the basin, the whispers stopped. For a moment, there was silence. I straightened slowly, heart hammering in my chest, and turned back to the diner. The figures inside were gone. The booths were empty. The room looked just as it had when I first arrived. Lonely, quiet, abandoned. My breathing slowed. Had I done it? Was it over? The coffee pot sat empty in the sink, steam curling lazily upward. I wiped my sweaty palms against my apron and glanced back toward the door. The fogged glass was clear now, no figures pressed against it. I exhaled, letting my shoulders drop. It's over. And then I saw it, the reflection in the glass door. It was me, standing behind the counter. But my reflection didn't move when I did. It just stared at me, wide-eyed and smiling that too wide smile I'd seen earlier. My blood turned to ice. "Thank you for pouring it out," my reflection said softly. The voice didn't come from my mouth. It came from the air around me. Before I could scream, the diner lights flickered and went out. The darkness swallowed me whole. For a moment I couldn't see anything. No light, no shadows, only the suffocating weight of the blackness pressing against my skin. My breathing grew erratic as my fingers scrambled over the countertop, searching for the flashlight. I found it. My trembling hands flicked it on, and the narrow beam cut through the dark. The diner looked worse than ever, almost decayed. The once clean booths were torn and moldy, the wallpaper peeling like skin, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with something rotten. I aimed the light at the coffee pot in the sink. It was empty now, but the sink was full of black sludge. The tar-like liquid bubbled quietly, as though something underneath was trying to surface. I turned away, bile rising in my throat. Focus. Get out of here. I moved toward the diner's front door, my steps careful, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The glass was clear again. No fog, no figures. The air was still, but I didn't trust it. As I neared the door, I stopped dead in my tracks. The faint hum had returned, vibrating softly through the floorboards. I whipped my flashlight toward the counter and froze. The figures were back. They sat in the booths again, Faces turned toward me. Only this time, they were moving, slow, jerky movements, as though they were learning how to act human. One figure turned its head too far, the bones audibly cracking as it stared at me with blank white eyes. Another dragged its gnarled fingers across the table, leaving deep grooves in the wood. The flashlight flickered. I stepped back. No, 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 no. The man in the suit was there again, this time sitting on a stool at the counter. He raised a cup of coffee to his lips and grinned. "You broke the rules, Lily," he said in that dry, gravelly voice. I felt tears burning in my eyes. "I poured the coffee out. I followed the rules." The man laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that scraped against my mind. "You didn't listen, girl. You're still here." I turned back to the door. I didn't care anymore. I had to get out. I threw myself at the handle, expecting it to resist, but this time it gave way. The door swung open, and a blast of cold desert air hit me like a slap to the face. I stumbled outside, panting, my shoes crunching against gravel. The lot outside the diner was dark, stretching endlessly into the empty desert. The gas pumps were rusted, their hoses torn and trailing along the ground like dead snakes. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom, but I didn't care. I ran. The highway loomed ahead, the cracked asphalt stretching into the distance. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling out my keys, and my car sat exactly where I'd parked it. I didn't question it. I just threw the door open, jumped in, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the lot behind me. The diner sat in my rearview mirror, a tiny silhouette against the endless darkness. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. "Drive, Lily. Drive," I peeled out of the lot, tires skidding on gravel as I shot onto the empty highway. The hum of the engine drowned out the whispers I thought I heard on the wind. The farther I drove, the better I felt, like some invisible weight was peeling itself away from my skin. 10 miles. 20. The diner disappeared in the distance, swallowed by the dark. I didn't stop driving. The headlights cut through the desert, illuminating nothing but empty road and miles of nothingness. I didn't care where I was headed. I just needed to leave that place behind. The sun was rising by the time I reached a gas station at the edge of a small town. The neon lights flickered overhead as I pulled up, the engine sputtering in exhaustion. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, my chest heaving. I made it. I made it out. I stumbled inside, the bell over the door jangling as I entered. The clerk behind the counter looked up from his magazine and gave me a polite nod. "You look rough," he said. "Long night?" I almost laughed. He has no idea. I grabbed a bottle of water and fumbled for my wallet, my fingers shaking. When I handed him the bills, I caught a glimpse of something behind him, a faint glow. There was a coffee machine on the back counter. A fresh pot sat there, steam rising from its surface. For a moment, I couldn't move. My heart began to pound as the steam twisted into shapes, familiar shapes, words. I blinked. The steam dissipated. The clerk handed me my change. "You all right?" I nodded stiffly, shoving the money into my pocket. "Yeah, I'm fine." But as I walked back to my car, the whispers returned. Software faint. "See you soon, Lily." I slammed the door shut, started the engine, and sped away, the rising sun barely touching the desert. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I knew one thing for certain. Some places don't let you go that easily.